Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to episode 135 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning, and today we're talking about what's in your control. So I think we'd all acknowledge that being at work comes with moments of frustration, moments of annoyance, moments of overwhelm, moments of feeling completely bloody stuck. In the midst of frustrations, in the midst of things not going your way, in the midst of people not behaving the way you want them to, you can get a bit lost. We all can. Whether that is lost in confusion, lost in emotions, lost in a story about somebody, lost in frustration, whatever that is, we can kind of get a bit lost. And there's one question that I find to be an absolute killer at cutting through that lost and putting you back on track. Sometimes it's unbelievable. It happens in an instant. And that is what is actually in your control here. So when I'm coaching, I'm sitting with an individual, right? And they're telling me about a particular scenario, something that's happening. And some of the time, the person that I'm sitting with might have some direct control or some influence over the situation, over the person. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have a mixture. Maybe they have a little control here, a little influence there, and then there's all kinds of things about the scenario that they cannot control. And what this question does is it brings you back to reality. It literally puts you back in control when you notice here's the things that I can actually control, and here's the things that I just can't. So, what can you control and what can't you control? What we know you definitely can't control is other people's behavior, other people's reactions and other people's decisions. You can't control those. You may have a degree of influence over them if you are their line manager, for instance, but you can't actually directly control them. But here's what you can control: your actions and your approach. Sometimes your mindset, right? Sometimes that's completely run away with you and there's nothing you can do. And sometimes you can, reframe, reset, and really bring that back online as well. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One is, let's say somebody's very stressed with workload. They feel overwhelmed. It's bleeding into their personal time. They actually don't think that they've got the capacity to get everything done. They're getting increasingly stressed. This might be one of those moments where I'm going to ask them, what's actually in your control here? And that question is going to cut through all the noise, all of the drama, all of the overwhelm, all of those difficult emotions that are happening, and have someone think what I put on my to-do list every day, what I say yes to, what I say no to, whether I go back to the client and say, this is going to be delayed, whether I delegate to somebody else, whether I decide to go to my social thing on a Thursday night instead of staying late to work, right? There are things that are in your control, probably in every workplace situation, but you may have to ask yourself the question to bring those out. What's actually in my control here? Here's another example. Let's say you're having a conflict with a colleague. You've got personality clashes, you've got misunderstandings. It's really difficult. Again, there could be a lot of story, a lot of they did this happened, etc. And that's normal. But when you're actually trying to get somewhere, it's useful to ask the question, what is actually in your control here? And you might say, well, how I show up to those meetings, the way I'm thinking about them, which may not be helping at this point, because every time I see them coming, I'm already on the defensive, and whether I'm, gossiping about them behind their back, who knows? But there are some things that are in your control. Here's another one. What about if you have a boss who has very unclear expectations? So you never really get what they're on about. You don't really understand what it is they want. They chop and change their mind. You're like, oh my God, is this really happening? They told me this. Now they're asking for this. This is a nightmare. This is awful. Great. We hear all of that. We appreciate that's probably pretty tough. So what is in your control? Well, I could draw out my own expectations. I could write them down. I could double check them every time. I could create a spreadsheet with the work on it and say, every time they ask me to do something new, you told me you wanted to do this. This is different. How does it fit within these priorities? Right? That's just a few little examples of stuff that happens all the time, stuff that I coach on all the time. But it gives you an idea when you're lost in the mess, in the annoyance, in the frustration, in the story about what's going on. This question, what is actually in my control here, can cut through the noise and give you some control back. And I think control and confidence go hand in hand, because when you're stuck in the drama, when you're stuck in the noise, when you're stuck in the frustration, you might not actually be taking action on the things that are within your control because you've missed them. You haven't noticed them. So this little question might help to move you from frustration to action, at least the action that you can actually take. I'm going to share this recent example from a client who has agreed with kind permission. They were finding themselves, because they always took their laptop home because they worked at home, they were finding themselves looking at things in the evening, responding to requests in the evening that would come through, and they were really frustrated about it. They said, my boss, they email me at like 9 o'clock at night and they're expecting a reply, and I'm supposed to be at home with my partner and with my kids, and I just end up responding to their emails or desperately trying to look for something or responding to a client, etc. And I said, okay, what's actually in your control here? And they said, well, whether or not I look at my laptop. Once they noticed that, we could explore, okay, well, what is the actual expectation? Is your boss saying you need to respond to this at 9 p.m.? Because some workplaces that's going to be the case. And she said, no, actually, they don't expect me to be looking at it at that time. So even if you looked at it, is it in your control whether or not you decide to reply? And they were like, well, yeah, I suppose so. Hear the difference. This was a frustrating, annoying situation for them, and they'd really got into a rut with it. It was causing them stress at home. It was causing them stress at work. It was creating a rift with their boss. But actually, when we asked what's actually in your control, turns out it was quite a lot. And this might be one of those questions that you write on a post-it somewhere or put in huge letters, because in the moment, emotions take over, stress, frustration, blame, whatever. And when that happens, we tend to, as humans, me included, stay kind of stuck in the story rather than stepping back and getting some perspective. And of course, I ask people the question, what's actually in your control, all the time? Because the reason that people have come to sit with me is because they know that coaching is one of those places where they can bring an issue and they can step back from their day to day and get some perspective. And I'm going to help them to do that. But by asking yourself this question, you're going to be your own coach. You may also ask this question to your direct reports. They come to you with a story about this and that and blah, blah, blah. And you might say to them, what's in your control here? So, what's the consequences of not asking this question? The first is that I think you can really stay stuck in the story. And that can be replaying the same frustration, whether that's just inside your head or whether it's also telling other people about it, without any actual forward progress. So, let's say you have a direct report who's always handing you work late. You might be stuck in the story of how annoying that is and how frustrating they are and how this is not great for you and not great for the team. But if you just replay that same frustration and stay stuck in the story, there may be no forward progress. You may not have the conversation with them. You may not reset the expectation. You may just keep doing their work last minute for them. You will stay stuck in the story, replaying the same frustration without any forward progress, which is probably not a great place for you to be. The second consequence of not asking this question is that you may just be blaming other people. And we all do this, right? We're the blameless victim, and it's everyone else who's causing us grief. But what happens in that scenario is we actually miss the opportunity to take control of the influence, the agency that we do have. Think about my story about my boss who didn't ever give me clear instructions and kept giving me extra work, and I wasn't sure about the priorities. And I could have just blamed the boss, right? I could be like, this is so annoying. Why doesn't she see that this is annoying? This is not good management. This is not good, blah, blah, blah. But where does that actually get me other than still stuck in the same situation? She wasn't changing, but I could. And while I was blaming her, I was missing the fact that I actually had some agency. Maybe there are some scenarios where I don't have any agency, but in that one, I really did. And in many of them that you're in, you're probably going to be blaming somebody else. But again, that kind of absolves responsibility from you. When you can just blame someone else, it might feel nice. But the reality is, in the end, it doesn't feel that nice because it can stop you from taking control of the action you actually can take, which might, not definite, but might lead to an improvement. The third consequence of not asking yourself this question is that you end up feeling pretty powerless. And I don't know about you, but that is not a good emotion for me at work. Powerless. No, certainly not great for confidence. And it's certainly not great for perspective. It's not great to help you take the action that you can take to get out of a situation or to improve something. It's very difficult to do that from a state of powerlessness. So here's my challenge for you. Next time you're noticing that you're stuck or you're overwhelmed or a situation just isn't going your way, or even that you're blaming somebody else for something, stop and ask yourself the question, what's actually in my control here? My clients amaze me with how quickly they go from bewildered and lost to suddenly giving me a 3-point bullet action plan of the exact things that they could do, honestly. And I think you could too. It's a simple shift. It's a really simple question, but it will lead to clearer thinking, clearer decision making, action, forward progress, and hopefully help to get you out of a situation that isn't feeling great. If you want to come and work with me, there are 2 ways that you can do that now. The first is through private coaching. That's where we'll sit down one-on-one over a period of time. We'll look at your very specific challenges, the areas where lack of confidence or low confidence is showing up for you, and then we'll go to work on fixing it. The second is within the Confident at Work membership. It's a yearly membership where we have group coaching, training, you have a learning library, you have a private podcast, wraparound support to help you feel confident at work. This one's just for women. Head to the links in the show notes to find out more. And I'll see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident. Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident at work.